Hey, Nick.
Hi, Brendan.
What's this podcast about?
Oh my gosh. This podcast is about game design that kind of lives in between, let's say, the bigger spheres of game design, right? So video games that have tabletop mechanics, or board games with apps, or interactive theater, those kinds of things where it's like, it's not just a video game or a board game, but it has like strange elements of everything in between. And more importantly, talking with people that are doing that and thinking about it and kind of figuring out how to merge different ideas and do different things.
Now, if memory serves correctly, I'm just looking at the list of bona fides here, but it looks like both you and I make tabletop games and video games. Is that right?
We do. Yes, we do.
So that's not to say that we're experts on this stuff, but we're both very interested, I think, in these different spaces that have had an explosion of growth over the past 10, 15 years.
I mean, I frankly selfishly want to use this to learn things from people.
Sure. Yeah.
That's part of what I want, is not to like espouse my the things I do, but I want to talk to people that are doing this to figure out, oh, what paths did you take and didn't work out that were dead ends, or, little just ideas that never panned out, or things that thinking about bringing together different kinds of design thinking and experimenting, what comes out of that.
Yeah. There's certainly no shortage of people to talk to. There are a lot of people that are doing more experimental stuff, and people that are, dipping their toes in different oceans. That's not the thing.
I guess to be even clearer, in this conversation, we're not talking to anybody. We're talking to each other.
That's right.
And I think we've struggled to sort of exactly say like what we want to talk about, because it sounds silly to be like, the metaphors kind of start to break down very quickly with spheres and oceans and disciplines and so on.
But at the same time, we don't want it to be, oh no, another game design podcast.
No, I think that was something from the very beginning, when it was like, I think there's something here, as long as it's not just talking about design or talking about the latest things necessarily. Oh my God.
I guess it's Saturday, so it's not necessarily the day that you would have it fixed.
It actually was going to be fixed today, and then they call and they're like, nope, we found more problems.
Great.
It's just old. It's like an old car. It's not an old car in a like linear time sense, but it has old car problems. And I don't know. It's just really annoying to do. We thankfully have a good mechanic that we like that is also within walking distance, which makes a big difference, and is like, yeah, just hang on to the car for longer than we would, than theoretically we wanted, but like we can always just walk down and get it, and we can also walk to grocery stores and stuff. But yeah, it's just falling apart, and we don't strictly, it's like, we're pretty used to having the convenience of having a car here, even though you don't strictly need it. It does save a lot of time, in like going to Costco is just like a drive away, and not a weird, like a bus and a half, or taking a ride share or something, which was even more annoying.
Can't imagine.
Yeah. But Thursday we went, it was a free day at the Art Institute downtown. And so we got on a train and spent the whole day downtown at the Art Institute, which was a lot of fun and a lot of good needed distraction and just like thinking about things that are in front of me and not things happening that are way beyond my control. So
yeah, I could really use an excursion like that soon. I've had a very difficult time turning off my brain from being in work mode.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning and was thinking of solutions to problems that came up at the end of the day yesterday. I definitely sent at least 2 Slack messages today.
I am somewhat glad I'm on a very small team because it's like there's no one to message with ideas. Like I just have to write it down and think about it later, for better and worse. And friends, industry friends, everyone has like an invisible, favor meter. They are like, I can ask a few favors, but obviously everyone's busy, and I can't DM everyone constantly with random thoughts and flights of fancy and ideas.
Yeah, like that's something I've always wondered about, given your work arrangement, which is like, I would say relatively unique,
Yeah.
where you're in an established studio and you're not in charge of like operations. Like you're not an indie developer in that you also have to be your own secretary or accountant and so on and so forth. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Yeah.
But you are kind of doing your own thing in terms of like generating the design, being answerable to yourself in terms of, is this good or not? Right.
Yeah. The easiest way to describe it, that I describe it to people, is the studio has multiple teams. I am a team in a sense by myself. So right. I share production and operations and marketing resources. I'm in the Slack and so on, but it's a different game with a different goals and budget and structure and all that. And obviously I get notes and input on stuff and what I'm doing, and I have to talk things out. We kind of agree on ideas and directions in a, it's neither like I don't get told what to do, but I'm not making every decision on my own. Right. It's very much
sure.
like a sounding, like they're sounding board. They also have ideas, and also like, well, XYZ, the strongest direction, it doesn't really necessarily come from like Mike or Alexander, but it's just more budget, which is true for obviously anybody, but it's very much like, okay, here's a time frame, work within that, and let's see what we can do. Which is really nice. Obviously, like I enjoy having the kind of network, and the community is really not even community, but like people to talk about ideas with is pretty vital. And I think that's something that, like, I don't know if you experienced the transition coming out of like school or hobby development into professional development, right? Where like, I guess to speak to how I experienced it, like, there's a lot of, when you're a hobbyist or a student, there's a lot of students and hobbyists like around you, and you can talk about things and get ideas and like form quick jams and do all that.
Right.
And then, not that's like you don't talk to any of those people once you get a job necessarily, but you sometimes can't talk to them because you're under NDA, or
they move.
Yeah. Or people drift apart or whatever. Yeah. And so but you still need to talk aloud to people. Like I do a lot of my thinking in a, like, I am just going to tell you every single idea that's in my head. Mm-hmm. And once it's out of my head and like it gets hit by oxygen, it evaporates or it kind of solidifies into an interesting idea. And then you kind of just do that forever and ever until you ship the game. And so it's good to have like a formal structure where I can go to like a designer at the studio or an artist and go, hey, I think the composition in this is bad. Can you tell me what I can't see? And, the artist who just does art all day can go, oh, why don't we try this, and that? And that's nice. Obviously, it's good to have that.
Yeah, I'm a really big advocate for going to people who are quote unquote not designers for design feedback.
Yeah.
I think particularly young designers coming out of school are often in the mode of like, well, we are the ones that went to design classes and did the design work. And so these are my people. And getting people to the understanding of like, people might not necessarily have the language or even the sensibilities of like what's possible, but everyone is here to make games, and everyone deserves a chance to like offer feedback on something, even if that feedback is, you know, out of scope or not applicable in that situation. Like, you know, I really like what you just said of like the ideas coming into contact with oxygen, where like the reaction of giving voice to something and having it hit reality, other people's impressions of that idea. You know, just earlier we were talking about differences in expectation of like how to communicate something, and being able to talk through that produced like the idea.
Yeah.
And I can't stress enough like how important it is to like communicate with other people in other disciplines when you're trying to present those kinds of ideas, because that can be super productive.
Yeah, I've seen like weird assumptions from like both directions, right? Where I see a lot of non-designers say like, well, I'm not a designer, so I couldn't give you feedback, without realizing like, well, you can, and in fact, only you can provide specific feedback in a way that is like, because you're not nose deep in the systems and the problem and all the possibilities, you just see what's being presented to you. And then, yeah, from the other direction is like, well, sometimes as a designer, you do have to, I think a big part of the job is knowing how people will react to something without getting the feedback, right? Like the better, I feel like the better I've gotten at this, it's not that I make better games or more interesting games. It's more that I can think about something and go, oh, you know what, that's not going to work, and, you know, for X, Y, and Z reasons, right?
Right.
And maybe that's wrong or whatever. That happens all the time. But when you get those instincts and you start making those like logical leaps, it can backfire, obviously. And it's sometimes tricky to know like, well, how far can I go down this path before I need to test it or do whatever.
Backfire how?
Oh, backfire, like it's just like this idea just doesn't work, and
sure,
this system doesn't work. It's not producing the right emotion or tension or friction or whatever, and shit, it needs to, or there's like more specifically sometimes like, oh, there's a play style that just totally breaks it and it invalidates something else, or oh, actually once I put it into practice I realized, oh, this would take many more days of like external production to external like content production because I didn't think about something else. That's usually something that you try to anticipate is like, well, if we do this, are you ready to write 5,000 words of text? Yeah. I wanted to ask you about, so, you know, talking about playtesting and tabletop stuff, you have done more TTRPG design and production than I have. I've done a little bit of it, but it hasn't really gotten like rubber hits the road sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And the play testing side of it has always been interesting to me because I get the feeling there's a different kind of quality to play testing a TTRPG than a board game or a video game, which is a little bit more, you know, player meet systems kind of things, which is not untrue of TTRPGs, but there is a lot more, you know, the mood at the table, the tone of the person running the game, etc. That's kind of my like view of it. Is that how you've seen it or no? I mean,
part of my experience of it has always been that I'm very self-indulgent as a designer. I
would never believe a designer who's not self-indulgent. That is the number one shared
I'm just
quality.
in it for the money.
Yeah.
I'm here to get rich. I don't care about games
editing,
at all.
Yeah, I'm editing all these spreadsheets and thinking about friction and so on just to drive cars.
Yeah. So no, I'm very indulgent in that I design stuff that I'm actively interested in getting to the table myself. More than once, I have designed a game because I'm in the middle of a campaign or some other circumstance where I'm really really wish I had a game that did X, and I can't find one. So I guess I'm just going to make one.
And so X in this case can be a specific setting or storyline, or
it can be, yeah. A lot of times it is a particular moment of tension, a moment of drama that I know that I want the players to test themselves against, whether that's a heist or a last battle or a particular duel or an animated conversation or something like that, where there is a very particular thing that I want the players to have to test their mettle against. And importantly, that because it is a game, the outcome is not certain. It is not the sort of thing where, like if I had a circumstance where there was going to be this last battle and they were going to lose no matter what, and I knew that because I wanted that to set up the next act of the campaign or something like that, then that is not necessarily something that I would generate a game for, because the game, that outcome is already known. Although, now that I say that, you could design a game that is like, you are going to lose this battle. The game is about something else. Like, do you survive? How do you feel about it? What can you manage? What small victories can you manage to eke out in the face of certain defeat? That kind of thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, what jumps into mind is Everest Pipkin's The World Ending Game, which is a game you play at the end of a campaign, right? That by kind of necessity of construction is the campaign's over, the characters disperse or die. There is uncertainty, which is, of course, but like it has a faded quality to it. Yeah.
There's also 10 Candles by Stephen Dewey. Have you played that?
I don't know. I don't think I have, actually.
10 Candles is a tabletop game you play with 10 votive candles. And you write the qualities of your characters who are like the last survivors in an apocalypse situation.
I have heard of this.
And yes, as the game goes on, you burn the pieces of paper that have qualities of your characters in the candles to represent them falling apart.
That's great. We should play this.
Yeah, we should play this.
This looks good.
But anyway, all that is to say, I had a particular like circumstance that I needed or wanted really a game for. And a lot of times, there's never been a better time to say, I want a tabletop game that does blank. But sometimes there's still not that thing. And so you go, all right, well, let me see what I can put together based on the kind of feel that I am going for, the kind of mechanics that I'm interested in. A lot of times it has as much to do with the audience of players that I'm building the thing for, right? Like a lot of times when I'm building something, I'm building it for a very specific group of 4 to 5 people. And it's beneficial to me to make it, both creatively and frankly financially, to make it approachable by a broader audience than that. But a lot of times,
where non-self-indulgent Brendan comes in and goes, why don't we make a little money?
Really, it's more like a public service, right? Like I'm for the public good, I'm putting this game about 2 teams racing against each other to steal something. That's my contribution to the world. It's just, I just need that $7 to fill my tank.
That's fun. That is sort of how I think about making, I make analog micro games, which are 18 card games. They only use 18 cards. You don't use any other components. And it's funny because my brain, thinking about tabletop RPGs, if I have like an idea for something, it's usually exactly how you describe it, with a certain set of people and a certain kind of idea or setting or emotion, but it's almost always within another system, or I already have a system in mind to be like, okay, like what would be a cool, I'm playing Mothership. I have an idea for a weird monster, or like a kind of a hook for a campaign or something. Mm-hmm. And I guess my brain does not necessarily jump to instantiate a whole new game, as opposed to making a card game where it's like, oh, I think I can make a card game specifically about when you're in motor racing and you're dueling someone to a corner, right? And there's braking and turning and all these different factors. Like I can pull something together, whereas I don't want to pull out Formula D every time and go, why don't we run this scenario multiple times?
Right. Yeah, honestly, I operate the same way, and it is, which might come as a surprise based on what you've just said, but it's like a lot of times I am cannibalizing other things in order to try and make the thing that I want to make, particularly systems. And a large part of that is because I am not especially math brained, I don't think. Like, okay. I'm very I'm not good at probabilities, or even necessarily or I'm not good at probabilities or statistics or any of the things that you need in order to make dice rolls or card draws feel good.
Fun.
In my opinion. And so I really like to lean on people that have already done that work for me and figure out like, okay, well, what's a way that I can take this set of numbers that I know are good numbers and then continue to iterate on the vibes of that thing in such a way that like makes the car go.
It's so fun. I enjoy designing games so much, and it's so fun how much of it is just passing around clumps of numbers and going, this will work, this will do what you want.
Right.
Like they're weird. I've spent a lot of time helping friends inside of Any Dice going, well, if it's roll 5 and drop the lowest number, maybe that'll bend the curve in the way we want.
I've opened anydice.com so many times, and every single time I've closed it in a fury, tears in my eyes.
Blood trickling from your nose.
Basically, yeah. And honestly, if I've had any degree of success, it's from finding collaborators who are interested and willing and excited to help me with things like that. My friend Matthew Gusdile is a really frequent tabletop collaborator, and I have a game coming out a little bit later this year that's still unannounced, but I think you have actually seen the PDF of.
I have, yes.
Yeah, we share an artist, which is why I happen to put that in your hands. But all of that is a game that is entirely statistics and would not exist without Matthew's help. It is driven by, I can talk about the mechanics at least, but it is driven by rolling 100 six-sided dice and pulling a number of the dice out based on the outcome of the roll, and then gathering up the rest of the dice and doing it all over again, and having that dice pool dwindle from 100 down, and trying to achieve something before your dice completely run out. And the game includes tables that talk about like, okay, well, this is the kind of, again, we're designing that for a very specific audience of 5 people. And so we had a very specific idea of like, how likely do we want it to be that we win? And we chose a number and we went with that. But from that, we were able to go, well, I could very easily imagine a version of this game where you use this number instead if you want to, like 10 candles, guarantee annihilation. And it's all about like, what does the journey between here and the end look like? And so the game includes a table that says, hey, this is the number that we used for our campaign. If there's other stuff that you want to do, here are the numbers that you could use instead.
That's fun.
Yeah.
I'm also, I think I'm a pretty decent numbers, probabilities designer. Mm-hmm. What I am not good at, and every time this happens to me, I'm surprised, and I should start getting used to it, is I'm not a good action economy thinker in a sense. And this came up with the Banished Vault very specifically because it's so much about action economy, and because you have a certain amount of exiles, I can do a certain amount of things every turn, but that depends on where you go in the solar system and so on and so forth. And, you know, a certain amount of actions to create fuel and water and all the resources you need. None of that was really like planned out by me. It was, and it's very, and I guess intuitive or instinctual. I'm not sure. That sounds like I'm kind of like, I don't want to say like I have a, preternatural ability to this. It's just not how I think it through. But then reading after the game came out and reading, a couple people wrote some like Steam guides and stuff, and they were like, okay, it takes X amount of actions to make stasis and Y amount of actions to take this, and so all you have to do is X, Y, and Z, and you can solve a solar system in this many turns. And I go, oh yeah, that's true. And then my next thought is, oh, I'm glad that worked out, because I didn't think about that at all. And I'll play board games with friends who are, action economy brained, and I love them, but they will be like, well, I'm not going to do that. Like that doesn't like this. If I do this route, I'm spending 4.5 actions, or if I go over here over the course of 10 actions, I'm spending. And then so like, the equations start like flying out of their head.
You have that one friend who sits there completely silently for 4 minutes trying to figure out their turn as they do all of that math.
It depends on the game, but yes, absolutely. Which is great. I mean, that's like, I love board games for that like capaciousness of experience. But it's so funny because every time this happens, I think, oh, I really need to get better at doing that. And then I just don't. Like, my brain is just not wired to think in that way, which I don't know what that means. I guess like I'm not really leading to a point. I'm the same way. Honestly, I play board games about as if you had a board game that was a box with a carrot underneath it and there was a stick holding up the box, I would die for the carrot every single time. I am the most reactive, easily baited, no thought for the future. I am in the moment. I'm thriving board gamer of all time. Thinking half a step ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we have, I know you have played maybe once or twice a game called Dune Imperium. And I played it for the very first time recently, and I frankly didn't really care for it.
To be clear, Nick is joking because I played Dune Imperium like every week for 2 years.
More than once a day. Yeah. And what's funny is I feel like that game is a bit more on the like, well, you do have to start chaining up your actions and kind of plotting out like, okay, these resources will go here and turn into those to turn into points or whatever they call points.
Dune Imperium is both a deck builder and a worker placement game, and so it is a game all about here's my pitch for why you should play Dune Imperium. Have you played worker placement games? Have you played all these games where it's like, I'm a German farmer in the 1800s and I'm going to the mill, so you can't go to the mill because I'm already at the mill, despite the fact that there's a gigantic mill and there's more than enough room for both of us. Let me introduce you to Dune Imperium, which is a board game about conniving space nobles, where it makes sense that if I go get the spice, you can't have the spice because it's Dune. It's so good.
What if the German farmer was a Harkonnen and the mill was a spice crawler?
That'd be good.
Yeah.
It's so good. See, and I'm bad at it.
I'm on the Dune 1979 style of things where it's like this game could be over in 45 minutes or it could be over in 5 hours. And if it's over in 45 minutes, someone outplayed you so massively that all you did was step on rakes.
Right. See, my board game experience, again, this is from back in Texas, but I had a very, very specific group and expectation of experience where we played every Thursday night and it was a work night, and we had to go over to someone's house. And so we only really had 2.5 hours to play. And so we wanted to play something that wouldn't go longer than 2.5 hours, but that would take up the 2.5 hours. And so...
and be satisfying and interesting.
Exactly. And so Dune Imperium wound up really, really satisfying that niche really, really well. Just because of the way that it was structured. We played we played a ton of Gloomhaven when that came out. We tried picking up Frosthaven, but we didn't really have that much fun with it.
Gloomhaven is fascinating to me because I have only played the digital version.
Okay.
And I didn't like it.
I've not played the digital version, so I can't say how they compare. This
is great because I still don't know, because I don't think I know anyone that owns Gloomhaven, which I think is a pretty clear indication of like board gamers I surround myself with.
Sure.
I think it's a fantastic game as a system, as a like product, I guess. It seems really cool.
Gloomhaven is a dungeon crawler legacy game where each week you have the same characters, the gain levels and gain more abilities, but you're exploring new dungeons and you're unlocking things within the world as you keep playing.
Yeah. And then the manner of combat is you draw a hand of cards and this kind of initiative system, and you have a lot of different options and you upgrade your cards, and that's part of the legacy thing.
Yep.
What's funny to me is playing the digital version. I was just like, well, this is okay, but I could just go play Divinity Original Sin 2, right?
Exactly.
This is before Baldur's Gate comes out, right?
Yeah.
But like, this experience is a wonderful way to spend time with friends, sitting around the same table, spend 4 hours, let's say 2.5 to 4 hours of your time. And the legacy thing kind of like threads together your weekly games and so on. But if I'm going to sit down at a computer on voice chat with a friend, it's too thin. And I've thought about this so much because I'll play a digital board game every once in a while and go, like, okay, sure. Right. Like it's a fun game, but it's very weirdly flattened by being on a screen. And it's not even to say like, oh, the UI is bad or anything like that. It's totally fine. It's obviously meant to be the exact same game.
Right.
And it's deeply uninteresting to me. And that's different, I think, as well from when you play a board game on tabletop simulator or kind of simulationist type of thing, where you are executing the moves and like operating the game in the way you would operate it in real life.
Right.
That feels fine, quote unquote, to me. Are you with me on here? Or am I just totally by myself?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a very different expectation of experience, right? Like, there's
experience in what the player is experiencing, not like level of experience with a certain game.
That's exactly right. Where, to play Gloomhaven, the digital version of the board game. No, that's not true. To play Gloomhaven, the video game, I still have to go to Steam and launch it the same way that I would launch another video game. And so when I'm doing that, I'm comparing that to, well, I could play Counter-Strike, or I could play any of the other myriad things that I've so clearly play with all of my multiplayer friends. Among Us, I could play Lethal Company, you know what I mean? And like, Lethal Company is a great example of something that is like, arguably has much lower production value than Gloomhaven, the video game, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But because I'm in front of a keyboard and I have a mouse in my hand, or I have a controller or whatever, I think I have a different like set of expectations with how I'm going to spend the next couple of hours. I think so much of there's a weird amount of game design that goes into setting expectations right from the get-go of like, hey, what is this? And what kind of expectations do I have?
What experience are you going to have?
Right.
Essentially, like,
and like even setting aside like gameplay trailers and stuff like that, like giving someone the notion of like, hey, here's a game about two teams of thieves racing to capture the same thing at the same time. figuring out like how to position that and how to frame that in such a way that people have not the right expectation, but an appropriate expectation. You know what I mean? Like to go back to Dune, like Dune 1979, which to be clear is a different board game than Dune Imperium.
And that's like an area control, political, asymmetric war game, essentially. There's no mills, German or otherwise.
Yeah, a lot of mechanics. In fact, unique mechanics per player.
And there's an advanced mode, which adds even more unique mechanics.
Yes. Lots of opinions about Dune, but regardless,
I love Dune.
because Dune can be over in 45 minutes or it can be over in 4 hours, you need to have a group of players there that has the expectation that it could be over within those two boundaries, those two extremes of time, because if they don't, you're going to be in for a real problem. There's so many board game nights I've been to have been utterly foiled, just completely soured by someone going like, wait, how long is this going to take? Or wait, I can't play anymore. What am I supposed to do? Go home? Where they just didn't understand like what the framework of what they were getting into was. And I think video game, tabletop game, board game, anything, figuring out an appropriate way to like communicate expectation of engagement is super, super important. And when I'm sitting down and I'm, loading up my Steam library, I think I have a different expectation of what a video game experience is going to be like. That is not necessarily what Gloomhaven, the video game, delivers on.
Well, it's funny to me, I suppose, separately from that, is I started to realize, thinking about this sort of thing specifically, because I would think about it from the other direction as well, which is like Gloomhaven, expectation setting. If you see it in a store, it's a huge box. It's like absolutely massive. Like you could easily fit like a small animal inside this box.
I believe I have hurt my back lifting the Gloomhaven box at least once.
It's like a not joking necessarily lift with your legs kind of box.
Yeah.
And so like the appeal, or I think, part of the appeal to send that digitally is like, right, well, the computer is doing all this work and all this stuff that is like, this big box, you don't have to unpack it and sort it and bag it and operate it. And then from like,
which, that's not nothing. We had to, we were board game fans, and we had to leave it set up at one of our friends' house the entire time for a year.
People that you leave Gloomhaven set up, basically. Well, and I like operating board games, like and maybe this is just because I'm a designer and I'm always thinking through things in that lens. But I hope this is just true of everyone. But like when I sit down to play a board game, I like moving the bits around, thinking about the rules. Hopefully the ergonomics and interface of the board and the cards kind of helps you along with that, right? And it's frustrating when it's like, oh, this piece can't go there because whatever. And so to take that away, like when if you there are certain games that I play on Board Game Arena, which is just like a web app where a bunch of games are at, and you can go and play. I play those and it feels like hollow in a sense. Like, yes, I've done the same actions. I've seen the same cards, and I'm talking to a friend and I'm hanging out, but it's like kind of a cotton candy sort of thing where like, oh shoot, like I played Race for the Galaxy and it was over in 25 minutes. And yeah, Race for the Galaxy is kind of frustrating to deal with in person, right? With its hundreds and hundreds of cards and unique mechanics. But it does feel different when you don't like physically move things around and kind of like, because the players are the like gears moving things forward, right? The game will stop. A board game will stop if no one does anything, right? And it has that quality of like, you inherently, the players want to play the game, so they'll operate and keep moving it forward. Whereas like if you sit down and start a match of Counter-Strike and don't do anything, it's just going to keep going. And I think that's a big reason why I don't end up enjoying digital adaptations as much. Although ironically, I do play Race to the Galaxy regularly because I don't have a copy and I still like it. And I like all of it. It has really goofy, corny art from the mid 2000s.
It is very kind of corny. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think that much is made of the tactile pleasure of being able to pick up a meeple and move your little men around and fill out your little tableau. But I think an underappreciated quality, particularly for like legacy games or games that have that kind of ongoing bookkeeping, is the fun of writing down how things ended, like where are we going to pick up for next time? Those things can be busy work, and there are plenty of games that do not execute on them well and don't make them a fun part of the experience. But there are so many others that, particularly in the wake of things like Pandemic Legacy, where, you finish the game and then you go back to the upkeep, which can involve opening a little box or putting a sticker on a thing, which, Gloomhaven features a lot of. It has envelopes,
that's a lot of
new decks of cards to open and shuffle and stuff like that. And, when you're buying Gloomhaven, you are buying the experience of Gloomhaven as much as you are buying the game that you play. And
right. Like more than just the paper and the
exactly,
wood, essentially. Yeah.
It's buying yourself a series of secret presents that you get to open with your friends week after week. And yes, you can put all that into a video game, but then it is kind of just sort of clicking on a new interface in a video game and letting it do all the math for you.
And like, this really sounds like we're just shitting on Gloomhaven, which is not what I want, because I think it is a good game. But like
Gloomhaven, great. Frosthaven, I'm not about it.
Oh no, why not?
Well, finish what you were saying, and then I'll shit on Frosthaven.
So yeah, I was gonna say is like, if I'm gonna sit at a computer, I'll just play Divinity: Original Sin, which has more to it, quote unquote, in
right.
the like in my inputs, and as far as like sitting on a computer and clicking on things, I get more things, whereas the reverse is true in person, unlike Frosthaven.
Well, to follow up on that first, it's like when you're thinking about the user experience of a video game, right? Or to be clear, the user experience of any game, be it Gloomhaven or Banished Vault or Counter-Strike for that matter.
The only three games as far as
the three games, there's an understanding of like, okay, I'm going to build the UI and the HUD and everything else that contributes to the game feel, the way that the player interacts with this thing and the way that the game reacts to the player's input in such a way that it is pleasant and good and appropriate to what the game is trying to communicate. Putting a board game into video game format presents you with the unenviable task of both simulating the board game feel and trying to make the video game feel good.
That's true. I had not thought of it like that before. So you're one step removed.
More importantly, it means that you now have two axes that you could fail on. And user experience is an axis that's really easy to fail on, as someone that is not a UX designer. Well,
and what's funny is this leads very neatly to my actual true complaint about the Gloomhaven digital game was it didn't have an undo.
Oh my God.
Every click, or well, maybe I think there were a few points where you could cancel something, but like let's say most clicks was a true confirmation, or once you confirmed it was not undoable. And that's such I think a very key part of board games, that it's not literally like design space, because it's you start getting very meta with a design that like lets people, if you started like tracking undos in very specific ways, you end up in a strange spot. But it is part of the experience where, as long as you didn't roll a die or reveal a card, or
if I'm sitting around with my friends and I go, wait, I meant to buy that cow, not that cow. Can I take it back? Can I take it back?
Yeah. If you're not at a tournament with someone breathing down your neck, then great. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm here to have fun.
Right.
We don't even have to count points at the end. Right. And so the finality, the like the one directionness of a computer game on top of the double layer of interface, it flattens it. The interface thing is very interesting because I truly not thought of that before. But yeah, it's both just like from a production point of view, two things, like you have to communicate so many things, and it also, a lot of it needs to be recognizable to the player on two different axes as well, right? Because the game, you're sitting down to play and you're playing Wingspan, and I haven't played the actual digital version of Wingspan, but I've played the physical version.
We should play that.
And we should play that. You play, you do things, you roll dice, you get resources, and you get eggs, and you put cards down, and all those things need to move around the screen in a kind of way that mimics the board game, because there's only so many abstractions you can make to like make it not look like a board game. It still kind of sort of has to look like the board game. And in a way,
you're selling it to people that are fans of the board game, right? Exactly,
right. And then you need to have your like mouse click interface over all that, which is really fascinating. That's one thing I don't care for about Board Game Arena for certain games, is too much is automated, and when you don't see the operation of the game, it's one thing to not operate the game, but if you don't see cards moving around, it becomes very difficult to understand what's going on.
Right.
Or I'm just not paying attention closely.
No, you're right.
Which
definitively and objectively, which is correct.
I'm glad we found a name for the podcast.
Yeah. You're correct, and I'm Socrates, and and I'm here to not know anything.
We have a rotating Daryl.
Exactly. What's a really good board game, video game implementation?
What's that?
Dune Imperium. It's good. They did a good job.
I will not say too much, because it will, I think, start to swerve into me just kind of trashing a perfectly fine game that is just not for me.
Here's
a good digital implementation.
Here's a swerve. So talking about physical things being represented in digital space, can you talk about Amber Spire and Dice?
Yes. Oh my God. I could talk about that forever.
What's Amber Spire?
So Amber Spire is a game that I'm making right now, and it is a dice city builder. So you roll dice to create resources, and you spend those resources to construct new buildings and otherwise operate your city. And there will be factions and events and all sorts of fun things. And so dice are shot through this game. I am a pretty big proponent of digital dice should be quote unquote physically simulated with like 3D physics and cubes and gravity and so on. And this is something that I did as well for the Banished Vault, but it really kind of came from playing Tharsis, which is an old game about, it's just like a mean ass like dice allocation game about a ship. You're a crew going to Mars, and things go bad, and you can turn to cannibalism and so on and so forth.
I can't believe I've never put it together, but Tharsis is the most Nick coded game.
Yeah,
it's so good.
I've beaten it a few times, which I feel pretty proud about doing.
Also, you said it's old. It's from 2016.
Is it real? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait, really? I would have guessed like 2011. I don't know. You tell me. I'm not looking at it.
I'm looking at the Steam page right now, and it says
2016. Oh
2016.
My God. Never mind. I thought it was much older than that. Like, not much older. Let's say 4 years. Anyway. So,
I mean, let's be clear. The gap between 2011 and 2016 was like 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And 2016 and now has obviously been a century. So. Yeah. Tharsis taught me how important it was to have the dice be physically simulated, because it's a horror game, right? Like it's you there's cannibalism and, you know, all sorts of weird bad things happening. You get spaced and whatever, right? And I think there's some cosmic horror stuff when you finally like land on Mars and so on, or get to Mars, I guess. And there are plenty of games that have dice that don't do that. It's totally fine. But thinking about it more, like that very specific moment as a player, and you're playing, if it's Amberspire, Advanced Vault, or Tharsis, right? And you see the dice roll, and you see the number you want, and it rolls away from you out of view, and it slams down the new bad number that you don't want, or the bad result or whatever, right? That felt like a very powerful emotion that I wanted to like capture for the player, right? And the Managed Fault, all the dice rolls are,
it's an emotional arc, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's like a tension and release, and you know, like, ooh, you've got your fingers crossed, and you're hoping this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. Whereas seeing the computer spin a sprite or do a kind of like visual flair doesn't quite land, right? Because like, you know, in a sense as well, like you kind of know in the back of your mind the computer has chosen a number and it's doing a little thing and it's going to give you that number, right?
Right.
Whereas when
this is the toast, this is the bowling alley like animation that shows me what I already know. Exactly.
And when the dice are physically rolled, right, in the like 3D physics sense, you kind of know that the computer is like
also watching,
right? Like where everyone is kind of sitting and seeing what's going to happen, right? Like, and I think that's just a really fun thing that I wish all dice games that are digital would do, because it feels so much more exciting, I suppose, right? And as well, it has a kind of fairness to it, because as you know, and as I know, as every designer knows, and most players do, I think, percentage chances in video games are maybe not always exactly communicated to the player accurately, right? Like, right. I don't know what it is in XCOM, but like, I think like an 80% in XCOM is probably like an 85 or 89%, and then like a 95 is probably a 99, and so on, right? Like it's a little bit of a curve.
Sure.
And that's totally fine as well. Like I also like that. But in a horror game or in the Banished Fall, which has this like oppressive gothic thing going for it, and obviously less so less so Amberspire, which is just a science fantasy thing, but there is like a fairness that is like, no, this is what is rolled. Like there's not any kind of fudging going on back here. And I think that is something subconsciously the player picks up on as well as attention.
I think so, yeah. I think even going back to something we said much earlier, where we were talking about like people giving design feedback that are not necessarily designers.
Right.
In terms of like, there's a certain feel, even if you don't have the language for it, of what ought to happen, that I think players can pick up on. That
absolutely,
you know, again, to what we were talking about, playtesting it's so important to like put that stuff in front of people in order to like assess their reactions, to assess why they're reacting that way, even if they don't necessarily have the language for how that is making itself felt. So if dice represent the tension of horror in Tharsis, what do they represent in Amberspire?
In Amberspire, dice are kind of a catch-all for all of the systems I didn't want to put in the game. so
well, this is great, because this is again like me deciding like, oh, I need a game for this particular moment, but I don't want to come up with the mechanics for it. I'm going to borrow this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is kind of like a lot of what randomization mechanics are doing in board games. And so what are the dice in like very specifically in Amberspire? You put down a building like, let's say the kiln, and the kiln has one dice one die that you roll, and it can produce earth, salt, and brick, right? Very straightforward resources. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the distributions off the top of my head, but it's like mostly brick and then some earth and some salt. What I don't want to do, or actually did not even get to that point yet. When you roll a die, one of those things happens and you don't know which one, and then you take that resource and you do something with it. Okay. What I don't want to do is have the player, I don't want to put in like a worker system where you have to staff so many workers in the kiln. And I don't want to have like a morale system necessarily where like, oh, the kiln, like in, let's say, Frostpunk, you know, if you don't go without food for a while, buildings start getting worse and people are unhappy and you have this kind of spiral, right?
Right.
That's not where I want the focus of the game to be. But it's kind of weird and odd to say, well, a kiln produces brick all the time, right? Like it's just producing brick uniformly until the end of time. Sometimes things don't work out and stuff doesn't happen right way, or people are weird or whatever, right? There's all these little conceptual ideas that a game could simulate and track mechanically if that's where you want the focus to be, or you can wrap it up and say, well, you didn't get your brick today.
Right.
Sorry, you got salt instead. And if you can't do anything with salt, then I'm sorry, you got nothing and you wasted a little bit of time. The penalty for not using a resource is nothing really. You wasted a little bit of time. But what that does is in the aggregate kind of give an overall experience of a city that is a little bit like chaotic, right? Like in the same way that, you know, the kind of theory behind the Emberspire cities are full of people doing things that are kind of chaotic and unpredictable and in their own sort of goals and directions. And that's far removed from the player, but you still sort of feel the effects of it in not getting what you want when you want it.
Right. I can't remember if you said it explicitly, but like a key part of the way Emberspire works is that like you're placing these production things, but the city grows around those things. You're not also placing housing and such around them. It is responding to the player's choices rather than being dictated.
Yeah, and you have some influence in that, but it is not place every house, you know, by hand, or every district or whatever by hand. Mm-hmm. So unlike, you know, the Banished Vault or Tharsis, where the dice are like skill checks and their terror and whatever. Emberspire, it's kind of like there's an imaginary line. If you imagine a simulation as this huge vertical space, right? Dwarf Fortress occupies every part of that space, you know, down to blood vessels and up to like erosion of mountains. It's trying to do all of that.
Right.
For me and Emberspire, it's a much narrower band below which I will say, well, you roll a dice and you get what you get. And that's kind of what's going on. Below this is kind of a hazy mist that you cannot see, but you just get the experiences of. And that's a common, I think a common pattern in many board games. There's a wonderful essay by Rachel Simmons, who's a retired wargame designer who I got a lot of these ideas from, where she says, you know, look, you could in a physical war game tally up all these modifiers. If you're doing a World War II game, and you can tally up all the modifiers for like, you know, the gun condition and the wind and the bullet and the soldiers' morale and how much the soldiers have eaten and, you know, height advantage and all these sorts of things. But most of the time, what a game is going to do is say, okay, this squad rolls a D10 on an 8 and up, you hit.
Right.
And that kind of encapsulates the
all of those things.
If they miss, who knows why they missed? You don't know. You're a commander far away. They missed, and that's really annoying. And so that's what the dice roll means in a sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think sort of boiling down that notion of, I sent my dwarves down 5 layers and they came back with salt when I really wanted brick. But now I have some salt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe you can do something with that salt.
Yeah. Or maybe I'm really going to be glad that I have it in 2 turns.
Right. Or and then you're going to get to the point where like this fucking kiln has not produced salt in 5 turns, and I really needed salt, and I had a bunch of salt earlier, and now I don't fucking have it, and I'm just getting all this brick that I thought I wanted. And so you have these kind of runs, like these probabilistic runs of results that are annoying in the short term, but produce the kind of like an experience that if you try to simulate with like specific representational mechanics would either feel broken or just punishing in a way that is less interesting than the dice roll, right? Which I think is true for TTRPGs as well, in dice roll and simulation as well, or kind of randomization and simulation, at least in, let's say like OSRE kind of like the roll means a lot kind of thing, or no?
Oh, deeply. Yeah. Yeah. Like, and maybe this is the thing to close on, but like, I was thinking a lot leading up to this about Braga and Purin.
I love Braga and Purin. So much.
Like, so we both played in a grand campaign of Wolves Upon the Coast over this past year. We were both like freed slaves that got into a bunch of adventures.
This is in a dark fantasy Norse, Northern Europe kind of setting of TTRPG like, as well.
Sort of 7th century, but very clearly there's some magic about. So there's like Christianity and legacy of like Roman conquest and stuff like that. But also we ran into a Medusa and a dragon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff was like really, really well integrated into the history of the place. I think the referees did a really good job of like suffusing the world with character and circumstance in a really good way. And we were part of like a group of 30 people who would sign up for adventures and say like, I want to go do this over the course of all of 2024, basically.
Yeah. It was the background to my 2024 in a very good way.
Yeah. How often would you say you played?
Gosh,
I'm not trying to call you out, but I'm trying to get to a point.
You are calling me out a tiny bit, even incidentally. I think I only played, I want to say 5 times. I could probably count up. I think 5. Yeah, you know what? I can remember 5 if that.
Yeah,
if that
you know what? Let's call it 5. It was in the neighborhood of 5, right?
Yeah, and
like that included at least 2 sessions with me. One.
I think
it was almost
I think every session you were.
Whenever I was getting a session together, I would always think, I should invite Nick along on this one.
Which I appreciated because I had a very busy year and it was tough to keep it in the front of my mind.
I was unemployed for a lot of 2024, and so I played a lot of Wolves Upon the Coast. I think I played a dozen sessions or something like that.
Oh, that's great.
It was a very important piece of stability for me in 2024.
Yeah.
And my character loved killing monsters. She firmly believed that she had been put on Earth to kill monsters by God. And the events of the campaign seem to like really represent that. And the reason that I'm like telling you about our OCs, my character is like this berserker warrior woman. Nick's character was like this sapper, sort of a army engineer, 7th century style.
More of a siege engineer type. Yeah.
But I wanted to frame like who these characters are and the gulf in like playtime to illustrate what really how both of those characters' stories ended, which I thought was really, really interesting given the difference in the arc that they had gotten there too. And this is a little bit rambly, but we're talking about like the way that mechanics inform like player history or player story, like the story of, I have this much salt and I really want brick, like informing my story of how the game is going. And our story ended with me inviting Nick along for one last adventure where I was off to kill this vampire queen. And I had invited a few other people along, and the session, which is kind of one big fight, but had some very, very important like tactical build up to it, wound up hinging on these explosives that your character had put together. Basically that session, based on your previous experience cited as an army engineer. And my character like soaked a lot of damage and didn't do a lot of damage. It was really the explosives that did it. And I just thought it was so remarkable to have that experience of Piran almost as a guest actor in a show who is like,
yes, I can see that,
who can't be booked for the whole season because they're too busy for that. But for these very important moments will show up, and who in a lot of ways kind of saved the day there in the end. And I was wondering what your feeling of that was.
I feel like many of the sessions I was in were stunningly successful in our goals. The very first session, we defeated a griffin, taking 0 damage, I think, because our
dice were that good.
Yeah, our luckless DM also just could not roll dice to damage us. I thought a lot about Wolves Upon the Coast and that session because I had never thought about it in the guest actor kind of model, although I think that flatters my inability to remember to play games a lot. But what I've thought about is how much like open-ended space a game like Wolves Upon the Coast gives a player to role play with, right? Mm-hmm. You are given very, very little like numerical hooks to play with. You have your health, you have 3 stats, 4 maybe, right? And some 3, items and things. Yeah.
But you don't have a class.
No, you have no class. That's it, right? You just go. And it was stunning to me watching you and many other people, most other people in the session role play their asses off with, I say nothing to go on as if that's like a bad thing, but like in a very positive way. Like I need a lot more, like when I role play in games, I use very much like, well, my number is low, and so I'm going to kind of do this, and my number is high because I'm going to do that. And counterintuitively, I don't like D&D type games with a lot of numbers. So I feel like I have trouble, but that was my kind of, thinking coming out of that last session was like, damn, everyone is really role playing so well to a character with like really interesting goals and backstories and relationships between everyone else. And this is like 30 other people as well. It was like a mega campaign.
We did have the advantage of like, if you were playing in one of the final sessions, then you were probably someone that had like stuck with it for a year, right?
That's true. But yeah, and then as far as like that final session, it was fun to solve problems without rolling the dice, right? Which is my favorite kind of, as much as I obviously do like rolling dice, like in a TTRPG, you know, my tendency is like, well, if we can kind of like talk our way out of a situation, not socially, but like construct a fictional method of achieving our goal, and the dice come in and kind of like swat you one way or the other with a failure or success. And that's, I think, the mode that Wolves Upon the Coast is operating in. And it was definitely true when we were trying to flesh out a vampire with Greek fire. Yeah.
This goes to what we were talking about before of like, if failure is certain, then it doesn't make sense to roll dice about it, right? It is more true to the experience, and frankly, a better use of everyone's time to say, if you do this, you're all going to die. Yeah. And to be able to say like, well, what if we did this? And to simply say, yeah, that's something you could do. Let's try that and go along with it. Without having to be like, I don't know, you could do that if you roll good.
Sure.
You know,
we should talk about, and on a future episode, talk about the reverse charisma roll that I've heard about, where you roll, then you act out how well you rolled, which I've never done in person, when I've never played this way, but I really want to try, and we should do that and then report back, because that's the role, the mechanics and impacts of a role in a TTRPG is very interesting, and I feel like D&D is just casting such a long shadow that it is unfortunate, but everyone knows about that. everyone we talk to, I guess.
Yeah. How do we close the show?
That's a good question.
Nick, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you, Brendan. This was great.
Yeah. Let's do this again.
Yeah, we'll do this again. Next time we will have a guest.
We will.
And thank you, Brendan.
Until next time, get lost in the labyrinth. Nope, that's nothing.
I think that's a little bit more aggressive than we might want. Don't get gored by the Minotaur.
Grab the bull by the horns. Use the whole buffalo.
Keep your hand on the left wall.
Oh, that's not terrible.
It's not terrible. I don't know if any of this is going in. I don't mind the, like, you know, goodbyes and then just hard cut to